Right now, we have NCAA stuff to talk about, and we have a great guest to talk about it with.
Let's
So why
bring
don't you
on
introduce him?
Coach Gary Waters. Coach Waters, thanks so much for hopping back on with us to talk a little tourney and NCAA. How you doing today?
I'm doing fabulous. Thanks for having me on.
We love getting to talk to you about everything. You were one of the first people I thought of, as a person who's coached all different places. We saw a lot of double-digit seeds find success in starting this tournament. Oral Roberts, Oregon, Syracuse, UCLA. What's your thought on
Cleveland State.
Cleveland State when they were there? What's your thought on what you're seeing with a little more parity in these tournaments, that the number next to the seed doesn't always determine what's going on right now?
That's exactly right. And I'm telling you, it's even more so in these times. Now, think about the NBA playoffs. All of a sudden, you've seen Miami get all the way to the top and get to the finals because they were in those, what do you call, bubbles. And that's a whole different lifestyle. And if you're not a team that's together and work together as a group, or you're not very disciplined, it's going to be very difficult to move forward during these times. And that's what's happening in the NCAA tournament, I think.
Coach, we had Coach Donahue on from Penn last week, and we were talking about the difference between playing in this smaller environment where everything's in Indiana as opposed to traveling all over the country, and how much better it is for the players and the coaches as opposed to the fans being in one location and not doing all the traveling. What is the benefit to the teams, and then creating possibly a more balanced environment when everybody's in the same place?
Well, you know what I think? And this is just my opinion now, guys. I think it reminds them of AAU when you're in these different places and everybody's together, they're playing together, everything's going. So think about how they compete during those times. They don't care who they play. They just want to play. And so now a lesser team that, people thought because they had the big arenas, everything going wild, everything's tough on them, is not affecting them at all. All they're doing is just playing basketball.
Conventional wisdom going into the tournament is that the Big Ten was the strongest conference. I was gutted by Rutgers' loss. Michigan is the lone team left standing in the Sweet 16. What did we see out of the Big Ten that they struggled so much, where on the flip side, we see the Pac-12 with a quarter of the teams in the Sweet 16 right now?
Well, I think it's a couple of things that's happening. One, and people don't want to admit that, but in this tournament, like the Big Ten tournament, those are some heavy hitters playing in that tournament throughout the year. And I think they just beat each other up during that period of time. And they had to be up on every moment just to have success. Once they got to the tournament, they took a breath of relief or a sigh. And then all of a sudden, they're back in that kind of situation again. If you notice, most of those games went to the last seconds, in the last minutes of the game, to see who would win against the Big Ten teams. And I think that has a lot to do with it.
Coach, I've been impressed by the fact that we're starting to see more former professional NBA players that are becoming really good coaches, not just good recruiters, but really good coaches. And the two I'm thinking about in particular right now are obviously Patrick Ewing and Juwan Howard at Michigan. What is it like to see these guys come from the NBA, go back to college, especially to their own alma maters, and be able to recruit and then coach these kids?
Well, I think it's good to see them have success because, they put a lot of time into this game, and some of them have been coaches on the NBA level. However, it's a question mark to me because you have all these coaches today that go through what I call the grassroots and work hard to become a head coach. And now all of a sudden, just because that person is from the alma mater, they get ahead of them. So it can cut both sides.
What's your take on who's left for the Sweet 16? Who are you watching out for, both as a surprise that people aren't expecting and, somebody that's a favorite that people would say is chalk and a boring pick?
Well, obviously, you got to think about Gonzaga. And you understand, if Gonzaga wins this tournament, it'd be the first time since the 70s a mid-major program has won a national tournament. So that tells you how important this is for Gonzaga. They'll be the next since Bobby Knight to be undefeated to get to the finals. And so you got to keep an eye on them, see if it's what we really see is true. Because in the past, Gonzaga has faltered in the closing moments of the big games. So, you know, I know they want to see that, and I'm not caught up in closing, you know, how you play in those last moments, because on a given night, and this is my belief, and that's the reason why when I coached, we won so many NCAA games against high-ranked teams, is because I believe that the game is built down to that moment. And if you can build your team up for that moment, you got a chance to upset anyone. And I think a lot of the other coaches are doing the same. They're upsetting teams, and it's happening.
You know, we also like to have you on, not just... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
You asked also about who's a surprise. I don't consider them a surprise, but they are a surprise, and that's Loyola Chicago. If you remember 3 years ago, they were in the Final Four then. And so now the center on that group and one of the guards on that group are the only two left from that team, but they were two of the better players. And now they're back again. Same thing happened to me when I was at Cleveland State and we went to the NCAA, but the team that was the major team in the conference was Butler. And they had a great center, and they went to NCAA Final Fours and final games 2 straight years back to back.
You know, Coach, one of the things that we notice when we talk to people like you, coaches like you, is that you're more than a coach. And so one of the things I was thinking about as I was watching the first week of the NCAA tournament was what happened with Colorado. Colorado came into the tournament and just went crazy against Georgetown. And then right before their second round game, there was the tragedy in Boulder. As a coach, how do you deal with something like that, and how does it not impact the players and the staff?
Yeah, you're exactly right. You know, and I didn't look at it that way, but when you think about it, you know it had to affect them. And you had many coaches from that area talking on that issue and all the things that occurred. And, you know, it's tough because you're trying to balance so many things at once. And now, not only do that, add in the bubble and all that's going on in there. You know, I had two of my players, one of my players and one of my past coaches. One of my past coaches is on the staff of Loyola, and one of my past players, you may remember, Earl Boykins.
Yep.
Yeah. He's on the staff at Arkansas. So they're in the Sweet 16, and they both called me. We're talking about the things that's going on, and the verbatim, both of them mentioned how tough being in the bubble is. And one even told me that they had to get a psychologist to meet with their team just to help some of them.
You know, we think about the bubble as what happened in the NBA. The NCAA, we don't really think of it as a bubble, but it is. What has been the experience that you've heard about as to what the challenge is for these student athletes as they go through the tournament?
Well, let me tell you this. You'll love this. One told me that the bubble is like being, if they have any idea what being in prison is, this is what the bubble is. They said they got to line up. They got to take numbers. They got to get in rows, and then they come and get tested. And then to get their food, they got to line up to go, and they only get 1 hour a day to go out on the courtyard. Now, that's pretty crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
The experience must be surreal for these athletes. I mean, they've waited their whole life for this, and here they're locked down.
Yes, and for the ones that can make it through this, you can imagine, you know, how hard they had to work at this and still have success. That's why I'm giving Gonzaga a lot of credit. Gonzaga, you know, they haven't had any major issues concerning the pandemic all year. So you're telling me their kids aren't going out and being social? Something is, I mean, they're doing a great job there in Gonzaga.
Yeah, they definitely are. I mean, and look, we originally had you on the show the first time for your book, Character Coach. And so you're somebody that can speak to coaches and players. There's a couple issues that happened on and off the court that we wanted to ask you about too. We saw an Ohio State player, after missing a free throw, get death threats that led to a police investigation. He took to Twitter afterwards and said, honestly, what did I do to deserve this? I'm human. Can you speak to the pressure that these players play under and how fandom sometimes goes a bit too far?
Yeah, I tell you something. When I heard that and I read it, I said, where have we gone to? You think about overseas and in foreign countries about soccer and how crazy they get over there. Have we gone that far? Is it all live all for that? And as you said, the players are the ones that have to deal with all this. And to go out on that floor and compete and perform at the same time and do their very best, I know it's got to be difficult. And I don't want to say something has to be done, because we both know something should be done. But at the same token, we got to start working on the thing that I'm putting out about character, and the parents have to be the front runners in this, because they got to teach their kids how important this is.
So what do you do? I mean, you can only control what you can control. So as a
Correct.
coach, what do you? I know what you're saying is all of us as parents, not the parents of student athletes, but the parents of our children in general. We have to raise our kids to respect each other. But as a coach, what can you possibly do when you have students that they're student athletes, they're on social media, there's nothing you're going to do to get them off social media. They can't live in a psychological bubble and a social bubble. So they are forced to deal with these ridiculous people who are taking this to a level that it shouldn't be taken to, when the kid just made a mistake. And by the way, he had a pretty good game. So, he missed a shot, but so exactly. And I'm saying that as a Michigan grad. So what do you do as a coach? What do you do as a coach to help a kid through this?
Yeah, it's really tough, but I don't think you can run away from it, though. And I think you have to sit them down, and you got to have what I call social forums and talk about this, and then even take it as far as to the student body and have them sit down and talk with you about it, and so you can let them know how the players feel, how people feel, because what's happening is everybody's like what we've been talking about, in a bubble, and they're living their own lives and doing whatever they think they should do. That's the problems we're going through with all this stuff with Black Lives Matter and all the different things that are going on, because everyone's hidden away from everything, and they haven't heard what the truth is. And so you got to sit down and explain it to them so they understand, because some are just naive and unaware. But then there are others that are not naive and unaware. They're just being rude and mean.
Yeah, there's some people who know exactly what they're doing. I mean, I always have a rule: don't feed the trolls. But I mean, that takes trolling to a whole nother level. On the coaching front, we've seen a lot of turnover with schools at the end of the season. Something that surprised me when it came across today: Shaka Smart is leaving Texas for Marquette.
Oh, yes.
On its face, you would think Texas a big time job. Obviously, a lot of pressure with the boosters. What's your thoughts on balancing the coach's responsibility to the athletes they've recruited with the dilemma of them leaving when the situation isn't right for either side? That's got to be a challenge.
Well, it is a challenge, and think about it. Now, when you try to compare Marquette with Texas, that's two different animals, okay? And when you look at it on the Texas side, it really is scary to think that a coach could have one of the best records they've had over the last 10 years, okay, but lose in the first round, then all of a sudden they're the worst demon in America. And so what I feel bad for Shaka is that he had to move out of that, and I think he got ahead of what was going on. He's saying, and I bet you it's not only the institution. You're dealing with all the boosters and everyone that they see things their way, and they're coming and unleashing things that are really bad for the coach. So he's trying to find a way to get out of it. But at the same time, a person that's had a record and done as well as he done this year, all of a sudden you get fired because you only lose one game at the end. That's pretty rough.
So what do you do? So again, I asked the question, what do you do? And I know it's a general question, but you now have a school in Texas where kids have been recruited, and like it or not, the fact is, I know if my kid was playing sports, he would be going to the school that I would be most comfortable with that coach. Okay. Yes.
Right.
The name on the front does mean something, but it's really about I feel comfortable with my kid learning, because these are the most important years of their lives as far as growing up emotionally. So at that point,
Correct.
we have more movement. There's no doubt about that with regard to student athletes. They have more freedom of movement. But what do you do in those situations, first of all, as a coach, and then as a parent?
Well, I tell you, as a coach, it's really difficult. Now, think about the portal that came into existence this year. That's the worst thing ever. And what I think is being lost here in the whole process, and it's a part of my book, you talked about respect. There's a principle on respect in there. But there's also a principle on there that talks about loyalty. And people aren't loyal anymore. It's what can you do for me at this particular moment? And if it doesn't fit my agenda, then we move on. Now, that's the same thing. I'm saying that about higher administration, but I'm also saying that about coaches. Coaches are leaving without a hesitation. So no one is committed to one another. The players aren't committed because they're learning it through AAU that you can jump from team to team. And then you got the administration that says, hey, we're paying you all this money, and if you don't bring it right now, you're gone. Then you had the coaches saying, hey, I got to get out of here because I got to beat the posse because I don't know what's happening here. I mean, it's really a bad setup that's going on in college athletics. And that's the reason why I wrote this book on 10 Principles of a Character Coach.
Well, it's not even, it's everything that you're saying. And now there's an additional element. So now with the G League, you have a situation where they have this team, the Ignite, where they can bring in additional student athletes who are kids that could be going to college. And Hugh Cronin came out and complained about the fact that he thinks that one of the kids that he had recruited was being recruited away by the G League. And he was saying, I think his point was, look, don't say that we're on the same side. You're recruiting kids away from my school and not saying things that are positive towards me. And if that's going to be the case, let's just call it what it is and let those kids go pro and let them go into the NBA draft as opposed to this G League. So you have this additional element. As a college coach, what do you do at this point? Do you throw up your hands or, yeah, we can all read your book. Jason and I have both read it cover to cover. You know that. And we're looking forward to the next one when it comes out. But what do you do as a college coach at this point? Do you do what John Beilein did and said, you know what, I'm just going to the NBA at this point? Like, what do you do? Yeah.
Well, and I tell you, you hit it right on the head. Two people I had conversations with at different times. One when we were at a clinic, one when I was at something else I remember, and both made a decision to get out of the profession. And they weren't young in the profession. They weren't very old because they could have stayed longer. But they just said we can't just deal with all these issues that are going on. And one was Bobby Knight, and the other was Gary Williams. And there's so many things that are occurring that's coming up that, you never had to face before. And now the G League coming in recruiting, that's a really, really big thing because at one point, I don't know if you remember, is that they were sending them overseas for that first year, so they can get that first year out of the way and then bringing them back to the pros. Now what they're doing, you said they created the G League. Now they're recruiting, and so why wouldn't they go into a zero and done? Just you can go straight from high school. And I expect that to happen pretty soon. I expect them to go back to that. I'll be honest with you, because the one isn't really working because they're really not making a connection with the institution. Academically, it's really just a farce and everything else that deals with that one and done. And then they don't want to go beyond that because they think they're infringing on their rights. So you got a lot of stuff going on. If it was left to me, I would say they got to at least stay 2 years because they need to get that education of life in college, not just only the education in the classroom, how to deal with things. So when they get to the real world with the men in the NBA, they at least have some understanding what they're about to face.
So as the guy who literally wrote the book, 10 Principles of a Character Coach, if you were able to get all the coaches and all the student athletes and all the parents in a room together, what would you say to them to get everybody on the same page if you were the guy in total control?
Boy, you asked some tough questions here. Well, on the same, well, the one thing you have to have them understand is that they're going into an environment that is different from what they've been in. because they're coming from high school, they're at home, parents are there, committed to them, taking care of them. Now you're going into a place where, you've been thrust into immediacy. Do everything immediate right now if you go to the pros. Then if you go to college, your mind isn't focused, if you're one of those one and dones, on being in college. You're looking at the pros, but you're just enjoying yourself in every moment you're in college. So you're really not getting the extent of what college should be about. So when you talk to these parents, you have to let them understand that they need some leadership in their life, because if the leadership isn't today, it's going to hurt them tomorrow. And that's where I think they're faltering at.
Jeff asked if you were the leader. The leader, Mark Emmert, has been dealing with some issues and challenges throughout this, whether it's the disparity between men's and women's sports, players wearing T-shirts that say not NCAA property, trying to make statements, thoughts of delaying games or boycotting games. What's your thoughts on the statements that the athletes are making, and how do you think the NCAA is going to try to handle this? It sounds like they're going to hire somebody to review disparities after this is all done. What's your thoughts on how the NCAA is handling this and how the athletes are using their platforms?
Well, and they've done that in the past, and I'm going to give you an example. One situation they had was cost of living. Everyone's complaining that they don't have money, and if you remember the player at Connecticut that came out and said, we can't even eat at night. We don't have food and money to do that. And with all that said, the NCAA made a move, and they've really kind of given something back to the student athletes and said, hey, you can have your cost of living. Now, what is cost of living? And that is, when you get a scholarship to an institution, that scholarship is worth probably 80% of cost of living, meaning room, board, tuition, and books. That's about 80%. So what happens to the 20%? The 20% has not been given to them. So now they're giving that to them. So let's say, you got most players getting $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 beyond what they get for their scholarship. So they're getting something. However, at the same time, when you think about likeness and things of that magnitude, that's about them. And that should have been corrected a long time ago. And so you got all these different issues coming up, and the NCAA is trying to deal with all these issues and at the same time deal with all the court cases they have concerning these issues. I tell you, it's tough on them.
It is definitely going to be something to watch. When we have you on about your next book, we can talk about it more. The book is 10 Principles of a Character Coach. Coach Gary Waters, thanks so much for always giving us a few minutes and going on deep dive and what's going on with the NCAA.
Okay, definitely. And I tell you, I enjoy talking on your show, and you do a great job.
Thank you so much. You have a great day, Coach. We appreciate it.
Okay, take care.